We all know the drill at this point. For nearly 2 years now, I've been working to build all of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft, and so far, we finished roughly half the map. I'll be honest, after finishing Gerudo, I was feeling a little burnt out from the project, so it'd probably be smart to take it easy with this episode. Maybe I should do an easier region of the map, or just build a smaller area this time. Or, how about I do the Ridgeland, Tabantha, and all of Hebra, making this the biggest episode yet? Cool, great idea, me. This gives us a lot to do in this episode. Just to name some of the locations we have to build, we have to do Satori Mountain, Rito Village, Vah Medoh, the Hebra Great Skeleton, the Zonai Maze, and the Forgotten Temple. And that's not even everything. I thought I was up to the task, but things were going to be different this time around. The project had changed since finishing Gerudo, and I hadn't realized it yet. I was about to face a new challenge on the map that I had not expected, and yet I was oblivious to it, and naively started working, not knowing I was walking into the most difficult part of the project yet. But for now, I began construction on Satori Mountain. After placing in all of the trees that span across the area, I dove into terraforming the peaks of the mountain. In Breath of the Wild, the peak is split into multiple overhanging rocks, so I had to terraform those here. There was some other light terraforming around the mountain to be done, but not very much. Before doing anything else, I figured that I should probably figure out a block palette to use for the cliffs. Satori Mountain has these very sandy looking rocks, so the usual stone palette just wasn't going to work here. I experimented with different gradients, and after finding one that consisted of stripped wood and sandstone, I painted the entire mountain with it. Now, there isn't really much to build around Satori Mountain, so I was pretty much able to go straight to the top and build a cherry blossom. This tree wasn't anything too special, since it's pretty much just a regular tree recolored to pink, so it didn't take too long to build, especially with the help of Goat and Ombrains. Mojang added cherry blossom leaves at literally the perfect time though, so thanks for that, Mojang. I then made a Walmart brand Lord of the Mountain to cap off the peak, which actually ended up working pretty well. It's the Lord of the Mountain, you guys can't argue that. And moved back down the mountain to work on the final build of this region, the Sanardin Park Ruins. Ombrains, Goat, and Ezio were there to help me with these ruins, so it ended up going pretty smoothly. We struggled to figure out whether to use dark oak or deep slate for the walkways here, but ended up settling on dark oak after a heated discussion. And as I finished up the front of the ruins, the others were battling it out to come up with a design for the horse statue. And some of the designs were better than others. What? Wait, who made this? Is that Sealios? Did you make that? Why has it only got 3 legs? Good question. The next day, we ended up settling on Ombrain's design for the statue, and after that, it was time to put in the final touches for the mountain. At this point, it seems like things are going pretty smoothly. We already have this quick and easy start to the episode. But in reality, Satori Mountain proved to be extremely difficult for me to work on. It sounds ridiculous. This looks like a nice and simple build that's not too crazy or difficult. But that was the problem. It wasn't difficult. At this point, the project had become pretty much the same thing over and over again. Put these trees in place, terraform this rock, paste in these ruins, and it just wasn't very fun to build anymore. The part of the map we've built so far was very dense and packed full of interesting builds, but the stuff we're getting into now, there's just not as much of that. It's mostly just empty terrain. Seeing that I still had half of it left to go killed off a lot of my motivation. And just like that, I found myself incredibly burnt out. I was exhausted from the map at this point, especially after having just built the Great Sky Island from Tears of the Kingdom. And so I decided it was time to take my first official break from the project. I needed to take some time and think. How could I find enjoyment in the map again? Weeks passed and I still had no answer. But it had already been months since my last episode. I needed to get back to work. So I pulled out a temporary solution. If it wasn't fun to build on the map anymore, how about I just force it to be fun by live streaming it? Moving into the Ridgeland, my next goal was Thundra Plateau, and I was gonna live stream my way there. I started with the bridge that connects Satori Mountain up to the Ridgeland. It was a nice, simple build to help get me back into the project. In the background as well, you could see that Ombrains is working on the cast shrine quest with the stone rings. Now that I was properly connected up to the Ridgeland, I could start making my way towards Thundra Plateau. But there's like nothing between here and there, so I could pretty much just start now. But first, I decided to build the large mushroom trees that cover this area. I got the first one down with the assistance of Goat, using a mix of oak wood, birch wood, and moss blocks. Later, I came back to make some more variations of the trees. The sizes of these trees vary a lot, so I really had to make some at different scales. I held off on putting the trees in place for now, as I wanted to finish Thundra Plateau first. But this build turned out to be a lot simpler than I first imagined it being. The wall design was something I already built in Farron, so I just had to translate it into this wonky shape. Up top, the 4 pillars were also something that I designed in Farron, so I just had to translate it to the new angle. Afterwards, I went through and put all of the mushroom trees in place, really trying to make sure that they were all accurately placed. Ombreins also added a bunch of plant life to the waters around the plateau, which really helped to elevate the feeling of the area. Since I was in the area, I figured I might as well build the Breach of Demise as well, a large ravine with white, jagged rocks piercing out of the cliffside. I added in all of the spiked rocks to start, using a new plugin to do the job very ineffectively, but it got it done in the end. As for the color of the cliffs, that was the harder part. We argued on my stream for ages trying to find the perfect color. The rocks here had these divots with darker sections to them, which became the main point of contention. Eventually though, I came up with a big brain world edit trick to make them look a bit more integrated with the cliff, which finally solved the problem. After that, the breach was mostly finished, apart from some simple trees and enemy camps in the ravine. And after building a small bit of ruins nearby, another section of the map had fallen. Moving into this part of the Ridgeland, there's not really anything interesting to cover, so I'll skip over most of it. We did, however, have to build up the Blood Moon Shrine and Cass's house up above it. I put in the shrine and pedestal down below before getting started on Cass's house up above. This house is very similar to the Rito Village designs, so we'll be building some similar structures later on. Moving above Tanagar Canyon, Ezio would be working on the Tabantha Great Bridge off and on for the next couple of weeks. He began with a basic outline before getting started on some of the more detailed bits on this end here. The bridge has a lot of hanging pieces of wood coming down from the bridge, so he added those up using fences and fence gates. It took some time to add in all of these hanging pieces of wood and designing the bridge, but in the end it was worth it. Once he was finished, I helped to add a couple of the final details, and the bridge was complete. Now that we were connected to Tabantha, I colored all of the cliffs to match the sandy color we picked back on Satori Mountain. But the first real build I wanted to tackle at Tabantha was Dinraal. Despite belonging to the Elden region, this canyon is the only good place to build the dragon. Every other location it flies through is just completely out of the way. I started by figuring out the rough shape I wanted the dragon to have, but the final draft would end up having to be upscaled further down the line. And the easy stuff is over. This is where it gets difficult. Working on Dinraal was pretty intimidating, especially the head. That mane and those horns were pretty scary looking to build. But luckily, Shovel was there to help us out. And you might be asking why a gardening tool is trying to help me build a dragon. Well, let's just say that Shovel had some qualifications. Shovel bit the bullet and instantly started work on the head. He got a good shape down pretty quickly and tackled the horns right after. It took some time to get the proper shape down before he rounded it off with stairs, walls, etc. Meanwhile, I was working on the bulk of the body, adding the spikes to the dragon's back, marking the start of the legs, and painting the underbelly. Soon enough, the dragon was ready to be colored in, and we chose a few different palettes for the underbelly and back. The more difficult of my responsibilities, however, included keeping the goofy goober under control.
Oh god, what does he want now? I feel like Sealios is up to something. Sealios, what are you doing? Wait, did Sealios place the emeralds? Did Sealios do this? He did. Here, I'm gonna show you something. Whenever Sealios is being annoying, there's a simple command you can do.
Next, Shovel was working on the mane, as well as adding in some final touches to the head. His design for the mane really had me rethinking how we did the two for the other dragons we built on the map. I had begun work on the legs around the same time, which is something that I've always struggled with. But with some pointers from Shovel and the help of Alfie and Ombreins, we were slowly making progress. As we gradually finished the claws, Shovel was adding these flames to the side of Dinraal's head, which really helped make the dragon feel more fiery. And after putting in some of the final touches, Dinraal was complete. After the 6-hour Dinraal stream, I was pretty tired, and the streams halted almost completely to a standstill. They had gotten me pretty far, but they couldn't carry me the whole way to victory. As I mentioned earlier, this was just a temporary solution, because, as it turns out, you can get burnt out on live streaming too. And just like that, the live streams began to slow down. But they had gotten me rolling on the map again, and progress was being made. I hoped that this progress would snowball, and I'd get fully back into the groove of working on the project again. But no, I'm not a snowball rolling down a hill. I was pushing up the hill, because the worst of the episode was still yet to come. But for now, let's focus on getting to Rito Village. Along the path to Rito Village were some large overhanging rocks and some ancient Hylian ruins. A couple of Guardian Skywatchers were also roaming around the area, but I came up with a design for the Skywatchers like a year ago, so I quickly put those in place. On the hills above, there was another set of Hylian ruins called the Ancient Columns that corresponded with one of the hidden memories. These ruins didn't take too long though, as they were pretty much just copy-paste. Further along the path was another Great Fairy Fountain, but again, we've already designed these, so I just had to recolor it and add in some new rocks around it. The Ridgeland Tower also sits nearby, surrounded with more ancient Hylian ruins. All the ruins were just the same pillar design though, so I just had to copy-paste it around. With the help of some new building tools, I was also able to quickly terraform some more overhangs into the mountain before going back through to add in all of the pools of malice around the tower. I ended up adding more of these overhanging cliffs to the rest of the region, which really helped to make the mountainsides look better. With the Rito Islands in sight, I started painting all of the cliffs to the right color, using the same gradient from Satori Mountain. There isn't much in this area though. I pasted in another stable and finished up some more of the ruins in this area, but they were much of the same stuff from earlier. I also built Warbler's Nest behind the village, which was small but pretty cool. And just like that, Rito Village was upon me. Despite my boredom from the project, this was something I was looking forward to. Starting with the large Rito rock, it took some trial and error to get the shape down properly. The entire thing felt completely off and it just all felt wrong. But then I shortened the rock a bit and all of the problems were just magically fixed. In the end, I think it turned out pretty accurate. I also took the time to put in these other rock pillars in the lake, but come on, no one cares about those. Soon enough, I began work on the basic outline for the village, which was honestly pretty tricky. Getting the scale and height down took some time to figure out. I also got pretty hung up on how to make the railings for the long walkway, since they needed to be thin but with enough space to still walk on the platforms. Eventually, Go and Toby helped me realize that I was overcomplicating things, and I ended up using regular fences and trapdoors. I took the time to fix up the smaller designs sprinkled throughout the village, such as these archways. I also used this opportunity to try out the new pots for the first time. For the designs, I chose the archery shard, since the Ritos are archers, and the friend shard, since the Rito are friendly or something, I don't know. Moving on to the actual buildings, I started with the inn, which I unfortunately lost the replay mod file for, but luckily I still had this raw footage. It was definitely the most fun building in the village, and helped me to establish what kind of blocks to use for the town. After putting it in place, I also finished the interior, as well as utilizing my pot design. Shockingly, there was only one other type of building in the entire village, which acted as the housing units for the Rito, as well as the shops. The design is similar to Cass's house from earlier, so I based it on that. It took some trial and error to finish up, but I got there in the end. After that, I put all the buildings into their proper spots and attached them all up to the rock for support. I also built Rivali's landing near the top, along with this extra chunk of the rock. Finally, I worked on the plateau that holds up the Rito Village shrine. I had to terraform the top of the rock, which didn't take too long, before designing the bridge across and the small platform on the rock. Rito Village is pretty small, so it was already almost done. I just had to finish up all of the interiors, which were knocked out pretty quickly considering the small scale of the houses. I used a lot of colorful wood blocks like trapdoors and stairs to design a lot of the seats and the hammocks, as well as using the new chiseled bookshelf block. Back outside, however, there were still some final touches to make. I finally lit the village up with some lanterns and added proper support beams to hold up the platforms. Out front, I tinkered with the design for a hut that Goat had made earlier, before experimenting with the final block palette a bit more. I felt like there was too much dark oak in the mix, so I ended up adding a splash of spruce wood to it. Funnily enough, I ended off with the bridges that act as the entrance to the island. These weren't too tricky to make, as they all had the same design. I also added some trees to the island and did some last minute terraforming before calling Rito Village complete. Rito Village did end up working as a bit of a refresher for me, even though it did go pretty fast. I was really excited to work on Vah Medoh, but told myself that I should finish everything else first. Medoh would act as the light at the end of the episode, my motivating factor. Because I was heading into Hebra, which was pretty much the physical embodiment of everything I hated about the project. But I have a theory. The problem with this area of the map is the lack of interesting builds. It's just not very fun to work on. And looking ahead to the rest of the project, it looks like it's going to stay that way for the rest of the map. However, finishing Tabantha and Hebra would bring me so much closer to the end of the project. And going into the next episode, the finale would be within sight. And I think that would be a huge boost of motivation for me. If I could just push through the rest of this region, I'd be in the end game of the project, and the slope would begin to even out. While I wanted to move on and work on something new and original, something of my own design, I couldn't leave this project now. I cannot allow myself to quit. So if I can't find a way around the burnout, then screw it. I'm just gonna push through it. I'm going to prove that I had the strength to endure it. Prove that I won't give up on this project. I knew from the moment I started this that I was going to make it to the end and deliver the map that you've all wanted for years. This is taking too long. It's time for a big push. We still have to finish all of Hebra, and it's not going to be easy. But I don't really care anymore. The adversary isn't the map. It's myself. Moving west, I finished up some enemy camps in the area, and there were huge chunks of the mountain missing, which I had to fill in. Just nearby was the first secret hot spring, which I built up pretty quickly. Howzieky would later come by as well to make them look even nicer with some particles. Apart from that, the west side of Hebra is pretty empty, except for, of course, the Hebra Great Skeleton. The mountain above the skeleton was just completely missing, so I had to create the whole thing. With the mountain done, I finished up the entrance into the Great Skeleton Cavern. I painted the cave walls an icy blue color to match Breath of the Wild before starting on the skeleton. Its design is almost identical to the Gerudo skeleton we made in the last episode, so I was able to use pieces from that skeleton here. As for the head, structuring it all didn't end up taking too long. Again, it was almost the same as the Gerudo skeleton, so the experience from that one really helped me speed up the process here. After that, I built up the fins and the shoulder blades, which were small enough to not cause too much of a problem. The Hebra Great Skeleton was completed, and if you were wondering, here's what the finished product looks like with shaders on. Back outside, I finished up the area by putting all of the trees in place, which really helped to tie the area together. Most of the main mountain was also missing, so I had to take the time to build that up. The mountain has this large hole in it, which made the terraforming process a bit different than usual, so at least there was that. Again, there was a lot of simpler tasks in this area, like this river which needed work. I also built up the nearby Hebra Tower and fixed up the ruins that sit further below. Heading north along the trail, there is another stable and shrine duo, along with a bunch of smaller enemy camps. After once again adding in all of the trees, Hebra was starting to turn out quite beautiful. And with this mountain on the side finished up, that contained some enemy camps and guardians, there was only one location left to build in Hebra. The Zonai labyrinth already had a divot in the snow that marked out where the walls would go, so the scale was already set for me. Alfie, Toby, and I went through the entire outline, marking out where all the walls would go to start off. This took some time, but it was shockingly enjoyable work. The designs for the walls are consistent across all labyrinths, so I took the design from the Gerudo maze, changed the color, and tinkered with it a little bit. There were some different angles here, which meant I had to readjust some of the designs, but it went pretty fast. I then spent a couple hours combing every inch of the maze to make sure it was completely accurate. And wow, Hebra is finally done. I skipped over some things and went pretty fast because there wasn't a lot of interesting stuff. With my low attention span and the burnout still plaguing me, it definitely was not the most fun region to build. But now we were so close to the end. Apart from Vah Medoh, only one build remained, the Forgotten Temple. I quickly finished up the rest of Tanagar Canyon because there was pretty much nothing else here. I added some overhanging rocks to the cliffs, and Toby had already built the windmills that scattered the gorge earlier, so I put those in place. I also finished the golf minigame and this shrine behind the rocks before starting on the temple. I built up some of the pillars outside the temple first, which would end up appearing much more in the design for the bulk of the temple. As for the temple itself, I thought this would be a quick build, but it ended up taking quite a bit of time. I began designing the exterior of the temple using sandstone to match the beige color, which ended up being a pretty limiting block palette. Regardless, I finished up the front entrance and moved up top to work on the roof. The roof is a simple copy-pasted design with a bunch of rocks and rubble sprinkled across. Moving on inside, Toby joined to help outline the interior. We took the time to lay out the whole structure before we got to work on designing things. Toby worked on the lower floor of the temple, while I got started on the walls, which utilizes the pillar we designed out front. I then worked on this broken bridge near the front of the temple and put the roof in place as well, which turned out to have an identical design to the top of the temple. I added some details to the floor of this room, but decided to save the other final touches for the end, because there's still this entire other room to go. It used all the same wall wall designs and everything, so it went pretty quick until I got to the back of the temple, where the large goddess statue awaits. I was hoping I could reuse the statue I made for my Skyloft video, but it was too large. So I began work on the new statue design on the 45-degree angle. It certainly was not easy. I haven't built many statues on a scale like this, so it was sort of a first. It took a lot of tinkering to get down right, and I had to change parts of the wall design to give me more room to work with. I then continued with the final touches to the temple, including some large rocks near the end. I then went through and added all the guardians in place, and draped some leaves across the rooms to act as vines. The finished temple ended up looking way cooler than I thought it would. And yes, I know, I did forget to add the trees sticking out of the wall. I didn't realize until after I finished building for this episode. I'm gonna go back and do them later. Because now, everything in this region is complete. Everything except for Divine Beast Vah Medoh. Finally, the build I was looking forward to the most. I naively believed that this would be the simplest Divine Beast yet, but it turned out to be the most time consuming. I started with the tail of the beast, but this first draft ended up being way too big, so I ended up downscaling. I took some time to compare and measure against the other Divine Beasts this time to ensure the scales would be similar. The end of the tail was pretty simple to get built, but the base of the tail ended up being trickier. Medoh has these sort of plates on its back here, which I just couldn't get to look right. It definitely took some time to figure out. I scrapped the first few designs and started over, getting something better and working on the sides of the tail here, which ended up being like a combination of some spheres. Meanwhile, Toby was working on this ring here, which sort of connects the tail to the body and the wings. The tail was now done, except for the underside. Toby and I began to outline the wings, which actually went pretty smoothly. The only tricky part was figuring out the scale in comparison to the tail, as I was scared that they would feel too big or too small. Toby added the feathers on the wings while I was offline, and the next day I returned to properly design the wings. The sides of them took a lot of messing around with the shapes, but I left the underside for later. Up top, I added in the fan on the end of the wing and built up the stone ruins that act as the Windblight boss arena. As for the back of the bird, it was just a simple design around the main terminal. I did not want to build the underside of the bird yet, so I built up Meadow's neck in preparation for the head. The head ended up being the most fun part of the beast, and it wasn't as difficult to outline as I first thought it would be. The biggest problem was just figuring out the length of the beak. For some reason, the scaling with this Divine Beast seemed a lot more difficult and important than the other two we've built. I think the head ended up looking really good in the end though. I then came back to do the underside of the wings, which only really had this room hanging below and these 5 windows. The real tricky part was up next, as it was time to build the legs. The legs themselves weren't actually too bad, it was only the claws that caused issues. Ombrains, Ezio, and Alfie were there to help though, and we went through a few different designs for the claws before settling on this blocky version, as I felt like the stairs and slabs were making it look too rounded in comparison to Breath of the Wild. To finish off the exterior, Ezio helped me finish up the belly, which didn't end up being too much work. I also realized that I had forgotten about the propellers, so I had to build up those too. Moving inside, this was the most spacious interior I had to work with for any of the Divine Beasts. I swept through the main room quickly, and the end of the build was in sight. With the main room complete, I started on the interior of the wings with the help of Goat. It wasn't anything too crazy, and we finished quickly before moving on to the next wing, which ended up being even simpler. As a final touch, Howzieky came in to work his command block magic, making it so that the fans actually propel you upwards when you jump in them. And with that, the build was complete. After a long wait, another episode of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft is over. This region was filled with some of the most fun parts of the project, and some of the worst yet. But of course, right when I started editing this video, I got sick and was unable to edit for an entire week. I suppose it's just one last middle finger from this episode. I won't even bother giving an estimate on when the next one's coming because I've never been right. Next time, we're going to be doing Eldin and probably Akala in the same episode, but we'll save the Lost Woods for the final episode with Hyrule Castle. But I've got nothing more for you guys, so I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.